Assalamu alaikum everyone. I am Nadia Tasleem and I am here to talk about the Sri Lankan economic crisis, which has rather turned to be a socio-political crisis as well. Sri Lanka, a South Asian island with 22 million people having literacy rate of 92.3%, has been projected as the fastest growing economy in South Asia from the year 2010 to 2016, finally reaching at an average growth rate of 6.2%. Sri Lanka has been an ideal destination for the tourists as well. That can easily be seen by the number of tourists whom Sri Lankans welcomed in the year 2018, which was 2.3 million. Now, this ideal tourist destination is no more the same. Even Sri Lankan themselves are trying to get rid of the situation in which they are stuck. They are trying to flee to the neighboring countries in order to survive. Primarily because 50,000 Sri Lankans have fallen into poverty in the last few months. Now, if you look at the headlines, we see that Sri Lanka defaults on $51 billion external debt. Sri Lanka is unable to pay $7 billion foreign debt or foreign loan, which it is supposed to pay this year. Sri Lankan debt to GDP ratio has reached 111%. All of these indicators clearly show that Sri Lanka is no more the same. Rather, global markets have started seeing Sri Lanka as the bellwether for rest of the developing countries that are on the line to be defaulted. Hence, an alarm bell is ringing for other developing countries, particularly Pakistan, having more or less the same kind of situations that we'll be talking about ahead. Now, if we look at the situation of Sri Lanka, means of course this is not an overnight story. Sri Lanka did not reach at this particular level of economic decline in a night. Rather, there is a long story behind. Sri Lanka, since its birth or its independence from the Britishers, never had a smooth journey. It got stuck in an ethnic conflict between the majority Sinhalas that make 75% of the total population, vis-a-vis the biggest minority, Tamils, that now make 12% of the total population. So this, though, was the legacy of the Britishers. This did not lead Sri Lanka to work smoothly. Though Sri Lanka adopted this capitalist system back in 1970s, but could not get much advantage of it even then. Different governments had to take different measures to deal with this particular issue, which had led to the Tamil insurgency against the majority population. Sri Lanka even had to take assistance from the foreign neighboring countries, particularly India, in order to deal with this issue, but all in vain. It was in Mahendra Rajapaksa's regime, who was the president then, that crushed Tamil insurgency back in 2009 by launching a cruel operation against them in the north and northeastern region of Sri Lanka. Though he was able to successfully crush this Tamil insurgency, but that resulted in the killings of large number of innocent people as well. That is why, by International Criminal Court, he was being accused of mass murder. Still, his public was quite satisfied. That is why he could stay in power till 2015. Because Sinhalese, the majority, was happy with this particular act that he performed. Now, as soon as he was able to deal with this insurgency, what he did was to invest in mega projects. Since 2010, he increased the level of investment within the country on the infrastructure, on building some of the mega infrastructures. They included Matala Rajapaksa International Airport, then Hambantota Port in the southern city of Sri Lanka, and then even Colombo Port City. All of these projects were funded by China. These were the mega projects, and Sri Lanka was hoping to get back heavy revenue out of these projects. But unfortunately, Sri Lanka could not do so. China has been providing loans to Sri Lanka, for which even China is being blamed, particularly by the Western countries. Western countries now accuse China for the debt trap, and they claim that Sri Lanka has defaulted because of that debt trap being set by China. Means I won't agree with it much. Being objective, I think we should blame Sri Lanka for its own mismanagement, particularly the Sri Lankan government and public to certain extent, because they gave chance to this government, this dynasty, time and again. Sri Lankan regime, this means though Rajapaksa's government ultimately ended in 2015 and the new government took over. However, in 2019 elections, again Rajapaksa's family or their dynasty was able to get hold of power. When the younger brother of Mahendra Rajapaksa, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, was able to get hold of power by turning to be the president. After assuming power, he brought all of his family members, means most of the family members, on the top portfolios, starting with Mahendra Rajapaksa, whom he appointed to be the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, who recently stepped down on 10th May under immense pressure by public. And means, of course, it was not the only case. He actually appointed his brothers on the portfolios of Finance Minister, Defense Minister, and then his cousins and many other family members on different portfolios. What it did actually was this situation, this dynastic situation, which somehow made Sri Lanka to be more like an authoritarian state, despite the fact that democratic elections were being held. This situation led Sri Lankan regime to take independent decisions without being criticized by anyone. Adding more to it, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president of Sri Lanka, actually passed 20th Amendment to the constitution and increased his own rights. So all of these things somehow gave a blank check to this dynasty to do whatever they wanted to. Their objective was to appease Sinhalas. For that matter, they kept, as I said earlier, investing a lot on the mega projects, somehow coming up with the mega road projects as well. However, when they came up with these projects, they could not get the result that they were expecting to have. Means one of the key example, it had been a serious issue in Sri Lanka that was about the Hambantota port in the southern Sri Lanka, which was sponsored by China, and ultimately its 70% of stakes were being leased to China as well in 2017. Primarily because Sri Lanka could not get the output it wanted to. Now, if you look at this whole situation, what we infer from it is that Sri Lankans were continuously spending much more than what they were able to produce or what they actually had. So though they initially had this pro-market approach, but they deviated from it, and they started moving more closely towards being the social welfare state in order to appease public, in order to enjoy popular support, without even letting the public know that what kind of crisis Sri Lanka was getting into. So, this Rajapaksa, he kept relying on loans from IMF, loans from World Bank, loans from China, from Japan, from India. So those loans were burdening the economy of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka turned to be, Sri Lanka ultimately had double deficit. One was budget deficit, in which they were earning less and they were spending more as a government. Second, they got into this trade deficit because they were exporting less and importing more. Now, adding more to it, this man, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, during his election campaign, came up with an announcement that he would introduce deep cuts in taxes. That was again to make his public happy. Besides that, of course, he had some other thing in mind as well. And that was, he assumed that once taxes would be reduced, public will be motivated to invest more in industries and all that. However, what happened was, and he actually introduced these policies soon after assuming power. But in 2020, COVID-19 broke out. So public lost its interest in investing and the foreign investors started fleeing from Sri Lanka. Besides that, tourism, that had been the key industry of Sri Lanka, that has been contributing as 13% in the GDP of Sri Lanka. It also Sri Lanka started losing foreign currency that they used to acquire because of tourism. First, due to the Sunday Easter bombing of 2019, and then, of course, because of the COVID-19. So the number of tourists fell from 2.8 million in 2018 to 1,73,000 in 2020. Means obviously, since the number of tourists fell, revenue also reduced from $7.5 billion that Sri Lanka could earn in 2019 to $2.8 billion in 2021, which means obviously a clear decline. So, tourist industry was also falling, and Sri Lankan major source of foreign currency actually was something which Sri Lanka actually lost. Now, all of these things, adding more misery to all of these things, what Gotabaya Rajapaksa did means obviously he was realizing that Sri Lanka was running short of foreign currency. So one fine night of April 2021, he all of a sudden announced to ban inorganic fertilizers. So why? Apparently because of the health reasons, but critics claim that he did it because he knew that Sri Lanka was running short of foreign exchange. Hence, he wanted to impose bans on certain products. It resulted in sharp decline in the staples and in crops of Sri Lanka, somehow by 50%. So for the first time in history, Sri Lanka even had to import rice, which is considered to be the staple for Sri Lanka. And this process actually contributed in the food shortage which Sri Lankans are facing today. Now, because of all of these things, obviously, and we of course have to associate it with the mismanagement by the dynastic government of Sri Lanka or the dynastic politics of Sri Lanka. Primarily because Sri Lanka was already receiving warnings from Asia Development Bank. They got this warning in 2019, and that they did not have much stronger sources of production, and their spending is much more, and that is alarming for Sri Lanka. Now, even on 14th February, World Bank categorically announced that there are a lot of countries that are on default line, and they will have to face this default primarily because of the payments, because it will be hard for them to pay loans. And they categorically pointed out Sri Lanka as one of the key countries. So, despite the fact that Sri Lanka was receiving these kind of warnings from different agencies, government did not pay attention to it and relied more on getting loans from different countries. So all of these things contributed adversely in Sri Lankan economy. Now the condition is the public is lacking food, they are lacking basic goods, they are lacking even medicines. So more people are losing their lives because of lack of medicines than the number that actually had to face death due to COVID-19. Fuel, it means there is no fuel, and that is also obviously making the people unemployed, because many rickshaw drivers, they are in queues in order to get fuel, but they don't have access to it. Sri Lankan government is not in a position to pay to even the ships that are already there on the Sri Lankan coast serving oil. And all this situation has led Sri Lankans to be on the streets. They are protesting immensely, which has even led to the killings of many, and many others got wounded. Right now, they are not ready to get settled over less than the resignation of their president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Because Sri Lanka has no more than $1.94 billion in reserve. And so, because of this, means obviously, and there is much more that Sri Lanka has to pay to the other countries. Sri Lankan currency is devalued, which is obviously alarming for Sri Lanka. Besides that, Sri Lankans have started they have started printing more notes in order to pay salaries to their employees. However, even that is not something healthy to do. Now they're negotiating with IMF because they've already defaulted on 19th May. So they are already negotiating with IMF in order to get some bailout packages. G7 has announced to assist them, and let's see what all of these countries will jointly do. Now, Sri Lankan case can be taken as an alarming bell for other developing countries. If we just focus on South Asia and particularly on Pakistan, we see that $1 is now equivalent to 201 Pakistani rupees. So Pakistan already has to pay more than $130 billion debt to the foreign debt actually. So even it seems hard for Pakistan to meet these challenges. Pakistan is also relying more on getting loans from different agencies and from different countries. And all of these loans have to be paid back with interest. So this is not actually Chinese debt trap. This is actually the capitalist debt trap, which clearly manifests the imperialist designs. And this capitalist debt trap has engulfed Sri Lanka and can engulf many other countries. So before being engulfed by this trap, countries like Pakistan need to be cautious, need to take somehow pre-measures that are required in order to deal with it. Austerity measures have already been announced. However, more deep measures need to be taken, and a kind of public conscience needs to be developed. Even the countries like Bangladesh with positive economic indicators have been warned by the economists and analysts that they need to diversify their economy because they are relying on garment being their major export. And unless and until they don't diversify their exports, they will also have to follow the same kind of fate. India, a comparatively far stronger country in South Asia, also is struggling with its economy. 4 of the Kenyan states, including Bengal, Andhra Pradesh, Punjab, and Bihar, all of them are struggling because there is a kind of deficit in all of these states. So these countries need to be careful, need to be cautious, and need to take immediate measures in order to avoid the fate that Sri Lanka has faced. And again, I would say that states need, particularly developing states, need to critically evaluate their idea of blindly following the capitalist economic system, because that is not suitable for all. So unless and until you are not developed country, it would be hard for you to overcome the challenges being posed by the capitalist system, primarily because this is the interest-based system. An interest-based system ultimately exploits. With this, we come to an end for today. Hope you enjoyed this lecture and hope you will wait to have more lectures with us. Thank you so much. Stay blessed. Allah Hafiz.